Hey, everybody. Welcome to an odd post-game situation in terms of your Ohio State Buckeyes, a 42-35 winner over Indiana. Have a couple stats down on this crawl below us, but an odd game to say the least. Griffin is joining us from Ohio Stadium, while Jacob, Marcus, and myself are holding it down from our respective home forts. Ohio State, a 20-point favorite, certainly had this game covered on multiple occasions, but couldn't put Indiana away. I think that Ohio State is blessed in the sense that it's a team that can go out there and win a top 10 game and then have all of its fans pissed off. I mean, there are a lot of teams that are already sitting in bad positions right now or whatnot, and Ohio State wins the game. And, look, this game certainly was not a thing of beauty. There were a lot of issues. We'll get into that here during the show. But, what a mess.
Yeah, it was another strange game for Ohio State. It's kind of four in a row at this point. This one a little bit closer, of course, than the previous three had been. At halftime, if you're an Ohio State supporter, you're feeling pretty good. I mean, Ohio State kind of weathered a storm with two Justin Fields picks within three throws, which was the first kind of shocking event of this game. But then, once again, the second half issues plagued this team for, I think it's the third time we've seen it now. The Penn State game, the Rutgers game, now against Indiana. The defense just doesn't look quite the same in the second half. The offense doesn't look quite as efficient, quite as able to put up points quickly. And it turned into a very interesting, and it turned into a much more exciting game than I think a lot of people would have expected at halftime. And it was a fun game to watch for sure. A lot of points. I mean, one thing that sticks out to me is that Indiana finished with negative rushing yards and still managed to pass for almost 500 yards. So those are just kind of my first impressions as I'm just kind of rambling on here.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was Indiana really exposed kind of a path to beating Ohio State. They were down early, obviously, but I think they really took shots at the secondary. They really exposed the secondary as a major weakness on this Ohio State team. That was the majority of their yardage, were those deep bombs from Penix, and that's taking nothing away from Penix. He was just as good as the Ohio State secondary was bad. But I think exposing the secondary is one thing, and getting to Justin Fields early and getting to Justin Fields often is a crucial element to why Indiana was so successful and was able to kind of hang around throughout. I mean, Justin Fields, those three interceptions, it looked nothing like what he has shown in games past. He looked a little flustered throughout. He looked rushed. He still ended up with 300 yards passing, but I'm sure we all can agree that it was a different kind of game for Justin Fields.
We had kind of started to feel, the pressure that maybe the secondary wasn't as strong as it had been last season in the weeks building up to this game. But, man, it really got exploited against Indiana today, just with Penix really lighting it up. And I had counted just, in the story I put up, I think like 6 receivers had over 50 some odd receiving yards. And, he really spread it around. And that's part of the reason why Indiana has been so good, is that we knew Freifogel and Watt were kind of the leaders on the receiving tandem for Indiana. But then Miles Marshall kind of stood out and, just kind of spreading it around, really exposed some holes in the secondary, kind of like Marcus mentioned. Then for Ohio State, just we saw with their own passing game that the reliance on Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave, that might need to be addressed going forward, because if I look at the stats here, I think Trey Sermon had a catch, Jameson Williams had a catch, and Jackson Smith and Jibba had a catch. Everything else went to Olave and Garrett Wilson. And if not for the run game, Ohio State really was able to close out that way. And that was really impressive to see for Ohio State.
It was a strange game. Ohio State comes out, gets the first stop on defense, gets the ball 75 yards in 2 plays, a 65-yarder to Garrett Wilson and then a 10-yarder to Garrett Wilson. It's like, all right, here we go. It's on. And then Ohio State gets on defense, apparently forces a fumble that replay didn't even bother to take a look at. And, I know none of us want to necessarily be that, the officials screwed them type of look. But how different could this game have been if Ohio State gets the ball? I mean, I'm assuming it was like right around the red zone. I mean, it feels like it was 16 hours ago, but right around the red zone. I mean, yes, on the next play, the Indiana center snaps the ball over the quarterback's head and buries him deep, but there's a difference between getting it on the minus 47 and getting it around the plus 20 or whatnot. Ohio State unable to do anything. Another play where Penix's arm is coming forward, but the ball already looked loose. And then, Chief Tyler mentions as well that there was like a missed targeting call. I heard some people talking about it on social, but I didn't really have an opportunity to see the play. You make the fate that you make. But, Ohio State certainly did not get a lot of breaks in terms of calls, but, kind of is what it is. 2020, yo.
Yeah, some of those things are a little bit harder to judge when you're at the game in the press box when there's not a monitor right above you that you can kind of look to. Because, like, that first one that you referred to, that a lot of people I know on social media and you guys even in our group chat thing were saying it should have been ruled a fumble in an Ohio State recovery. And right then, Ohio State had just scored off to a scorching start. If they would have scored and gone up 14-0 there, we might have seen, a much wider margin victory for the game. I was confused why they sped it along so quickly and didn't allow a little more time to, or what was the harm in reviewing that? I don't know, but I couldn't tell quite how close that was. I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
I think, like you said, those fumbles. Well, one of those fumbles was hard to judge. I wouldn't take it away from the officials there, but the two things that I really had somewhat of an issue with here on the officiating front were the unsportsmanlike conduct penalty against Wyatt Davis. We only got a brief replay of that, but it certainly didn't look like it was worth a 15-yard penalty. That set Ohio State back from 3rd and short to 2nd and 20+, and obviously they were unable to get the first down there, and things kind of spiraled. And then late in the game on the bootleg play on 4th down to Luke Farrell, it kind of appeared that Fields kind of took a late hit there when he threw the incomplete pass to Farrell, and there was nothing called there. And if Ohio State ever needed a chance to get a penalty, it was right there. So I think for the most part, the officiating wasn't awful, but there are a few very outstanding issues that I saw.
Yeah, kind of just going
exactly.
off that. Go ahead. Yeah, kind of just going off that. Ohio State, coming to roughing those passer calls, those are already, give and take there. And I felt the Wyatt Davis flag kind of was baited in a sense because they both were up in each other's faces and pushing and shoving, and you just saw it kind of just get baited out of Wyatt Davis.
Yeah, it's a lot of times you end up seeing the second guy there, but it was an obvious hands to the face, which should have been 15 yards in the other direction. And, it didn't get called. If you enjoy what we're doing here live with BuckeyeGrove.com, be sure to subscribe either on Facebook or on YouTube so you can see the shows when they come up. Click the bell to make sure that you get the alert when we are going live. All right, enough window dressing. We have to talk about the elephant in the room, the secondary. Not very good today. I mean, obviously the Shaun Wade pick 6 ends up being the difference in the game. But, Ohio State gets up 28 at times. Indiana, realizing that the running game isn't working, 16 carries for -1 yard. Everybody in the building, all 635 of them or whatever the attendance ended up being, knows that they're going to throw the ball. They're just going to throw the ball. Marcus Hooker certainly didn't have his best game. There were some times where Sevyn Banks appeared to be out of position. This wasn't a case of Penn State's second half where Jahan Dotson just makes some plays. Sean Clifford made some throws. Jahan Dotson makes some plays. There were wide receivers for the Hoosiers just running wide open. It was pitch and catch, schoolyard stuff. So your thoughts on what we kind of saw there, guys?
Man, it just felt like Michael Penix was just slinging it downfield and an Indiana receiver was just going to come up with it and make a 60-yard touchdown for a while there. I mean, my God. And then even on that last possession when Indiana got it back and still had a chance, it was like, man, you just did not feel good about that Buckeye secondary. And that's one of the biggest question marks we've been talking about in and out at the beginning of the season. After every game, we've said, this Buckeye secondary, we still don't know too much. Against Nebraska, it wasn't tested very much. Against Penn State, we saw in the second half, Penn State was able to get a lot of things going in the pass game. But today was like the biggest example of that. I mean, Ohio State, Indiana had no run game at all, and they were able to put up those huge numbers in just the pass game alone. And everyone thought coming into the season that Shaun Wade was going to be, the strong guy in that secondary, the lone returning starter. And I've kind of thrown around after the last couple of weeks. I've said, man, what if they had just left Shaun Wade at that slot position? You know what I mean? And I think I saw a lot more people saying that today, saying like, man, that the move to the outside maybe is not nearly as clean as everyone expected. And he did end up making a huge play, that pick six, putting points on the board for Ohio State when it was just a one-score game. That was massive for Ohio State, and that was kind of a monkey off of his back in a sense. But then there were still several other huge plays that he was part of giving up. And I think I see some people are talking about Marcus Hooker. It seemed like there was a lot of miscommunications with the safety in that secondary as well. Even in the first couple plays of the game, Ohio State had to burn a timeout because Tuff Borland and Marcus Hooker were not on the same page with who needed to be covering an Indiana wide receiver. And you saw that right off the bat, and then you saw the miscommunications kind of plague them later on as well.
Yeah, I think you said it. I think you said it best, Griffin. When Indiana got the ball back at around the 10-yard line, you said the entire game. Every time they had a chance, every time Penix dropped back, it's kind of how I felt with Justin Fields most times before this game. Every time he drops back, you think they could score. I mean, it was that bad. And I think, talking about Hooker, I think you got to see more Josh Proctor in the future. I mean, the only time I really saw his name pop up was on that special teams play where he delivered an absolutely massive hit. Hooker, to me, he looked a little lost out there. Like Griffin said, there was so much miscommunication. I think on either the first or the second deep ball Penix threw in the first half, it was clear that Hooker was supposed to drop back, and he kind of ran up into no man's land and allowed a one-on-one coverage there. And I see a question from Ryan that says, is there a solution besides starting Josh Proctor over Hooker? I mean, you either got to give the young guys a chance, which we don't know much about right now, or it seemed in the post game that Shaun Wade and Ryan Day, they're a little too positive for my liking about the secondary. They seem to be very upbeat about it, say we're improving each game, and it seems like there's a very clear issue that needs to be addressed soon.
I agree 100%. Just taking a look at some of the stats, Indiana had 10 big plays that were defined as 15 yards or more, and I found myself every time Indiana took the field, I wasn't afraid that they were going to make the play. I was afraid that Ohio State was going to allow enough spacing for them to capitalize on that. And we saw even Indiana dropped a pass where there was I believe this was in the first half, Freifogel or somebody dropped one where there was just daylight right there, and kind of killed their momentum early on in the first half. But they really picked it up in the second half. And, somebody mentioned pass breakups. Ohio State only had 8 of those. And it obviously wasn't enough for Penix, who completed 27 for close to 500 yards passing. I just feel like he has so many weapons, and Freifogel having 200 yards again this week kind of really doesn't say enough about, guys like Miles Marshall, David Ellis, and Watt Filer, even Peyton Hendershot even.
If I could jump back in for a second, I just wanted to highlight one specific play that you guys will probably remember. And I was able to see it really well because I'm, sitting above everything up in the press box. So the play, it was the Freifogel touchdown where it was there was a defensive pass interference called. Some people are saying, okay, maybe it was an offensive pass interference. Regardless, after he scored that touchdown, every single player on the Ohio State defense was just stood still and was just looking back at the end zone, just all in disbelief. They were all just standing there, literally just that was a play where you could feel. That was a gut punch. That was a momentum changer. It sucked the air out of. If there was anybody in the building other than the 600 people that were there, the air would have been sucked out of it. And I just thought that image alone of just those guys just standing completely still and looking back as Indiana's going off the field, I think that said a lot about the state of the secondary and defense right now.
Right. We look at the young secondary guys that aren't out there yet at safety: Ronnie Hickman, Lathan Ransom, Bryson Shaw. At corner, You still have guys like Legend Cavazos, who was finally cleared and was not on a game time or an out list. Cameron Martinez, the true freshman, Ryan Watts. I mean, you have to wonder. I mean, certainly don't want to get into a point of we were saying, well, this guy screwed up or that guy screwed up or whatnot. But there were a lot of screw ups to go around, and Ryan Day was asked after the very carefully about how tough is it if you have to sit there and make these types of personnel decisions, and Ryan Day going to be fiercely loyal to his players, but did say 491 passing yards, that's just way too many or whatnot. So we'll be I'll be interested to see going into the Illinois game what that ends up looking like. But one thing I know about games at Illinois, that place is a damn wind tunnel. And it'll be interesting to see what throwing the ball looks like there here at the end of November. And that certainly brings me to my next thing, which was Ohio State finding its running game. And Master Teague, 26 carries, $169, 2 touchdowns. Justin Fields had 78 of his own. And Trey Sermon had 60, only on 9 carries. Ohio State had a 6.1 yard average, 50 carries for 307. Certainly, it wouldn't have been as dramatic of a game if Ohio State would have gotten to like 312, 315. Could have closed out a couple more drives where it would have made the game a little less dramatic, if you will. But what are some of your thoughts on what you saw out of the Ohio State running game after it'd been pretty frustrating in a lot of ways? Even though Ohio State still averaged 208 a game going into this one and was pretty much like right at 100 yards above that number.
This game was a perfect example of why I thought it was kind of ridiculous when Ryan Day the other day said, or after the Rutgers game, he was getting asked about the run game not looking very, as popping as much as it was last year in seasons past. And Ryan Day said, we don't need to run for more than 200 yards in a game. 200 yards is great. 200 yards, what they had been averaging was third best in the Big Ten. But a game like today is exactly why you can't just average 200 yards. Because the passing game, as great as it looked before today, and even though you still had 300 yards passing today, it wasn't always working, and it's not always going to work. And so you need to be able to have a running game where you feel like somebody could bust a 40-yard touchdown. And that is the one thing that they got today that they did not have before. They had a couple big runs. In the Rutgers game, a lot of those yards came off those 2 runs that, they were just kind of fluke runs. You need to have the threat of busting a 50-yard run to score. That needs to be, a threat in the offense, and it wasn't before. And I think now it is. I think in Master Teague especially, that's a guy that a lot of people were saying, questioning his agility or his, breakaway speed, things like that, and thinking that Trey Sermon might be more of that type of guy. I think Master Teague showed that he can pop some big ones. And that was a big thing for the Ohio State offense today.
I agree about Master Teague. It was definitely very encouraging to see that he has that burst. He had a 41-yard touchdown. He had a 19-yard run in the first quarter. He had a 32-yard run in the third quarter. Like, he has that ability to kind of blow by the first level of defense, and he takes contact. He bounces off contact, which is a huge plus for him. I think that's his best attribute, is he can run through contact. But I will say, 307 yards is great. It was much improved. But the fourth quarter, it was really disappointing to me. They couldn't get those first downs. They couldn't seal the game off there. I was looking at Master Teague's carries in the fourth quarter, and they gave him a chance to be like that workhorse that winds the clock down and runs the ball every time. He had 10 carries in the fourth quarter for 27 yards, which it doesn't cut it there. You have to be able to get those yards, get the first downs. So I think 307 yards it's what we needed to see, but I think now we need to see consistency throughout the game and an ability to, if the passing game isn't working, ability to close out games with the run, which Ohio State didn't really do today.
I have a lot of faith in Master Teague just because, I was impressed with what he was able to do in his limited opportunities last season. But we heard a few weeks ago how Ryan Day kind of wanted to limit Justin Fields' scrambling. And just looking at some of his stats, his 78 yards rushing today are the most he's had as a member of Ohio State. And so what does that say particularly about their offense and protection about the offensive line? Either way, Ohio State's probably going to take those positive yards there because it helped them win today, only up, by 7 points at the end of the game. I'm curious how they're going to address that going forward because, like I mentioned earlier, Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave are going to get figured out as the season progresses. So how much are they going to rely on Fields continuing to run is something that I'm interested in looking at going forward.
I want to bring a question in really quick with Ryan D asking about if Teague can't go next week and point out that, Master Teague did get up a little gimpy at one point, but he did go back into the game. And of course, you're all hopped up on adrenaline at that point. And, that run, he was hitting the backfield for a loss a couple yards there. We won't know until we know, but it wasn't as if Teague got knocked out of the game. He did come back in as Griffin is masking up. I'm sure somebody's out in his area right now. What are some of your other thoughts in terms of this game? I mean, we've touched upon Ohio State's pass defense, which I think is what everybody's going to want to talk about. Everybody be ready to write a lot of stories about that moving forward. We've talked about Ohio State's ability to run. We haven't really talked about Justin Fields and his 3 interceptions. Justin Fields had more interceptions or more incompletions in this game than he had in the previous 3 games combined. It was 11 in the first 3 games. He had 12 in this game. 3 picks. One of them was on a tip drill. I mean, he did kind of go into him a little bit in the post game. Indiana, to its credit, really brought the house. I mean, we saw a lot of times it sent all 3 linebackers, and they all came up through the A gap, and it confused Ohio State. I don't know if anybody's going to be able to pull that off moving forward, but it certainly did show a bit of a formula maybe to fluster the Buckeyes and slow some things down.
Yeah, and you talk about Fields' play. That was kind of my number one takeaway from this game. That was the first story I wrote about right after the game. And my main question everyone's going to be saying is Justin Fields now out of Heisman contention? Because he had started the season so hot, throwing the ball at 87% completion rate. And that's going to drop after today. You get those 3 interceptions. And honestly, I think today, after today's performance, that was probably the most disappointed Justin Fields I've ever seen at the podium. Because even last year after the Fiesta Bowl, I don't know, there was something about the way he responded to that last-minute interception. It was just kind of like really taking it on the chin and just being like, he just came out and was like, that was a miscommunication, kind of owning up to it, but with a certain confidence. I think today it really showed after the game. He really seemed kind of irked. He seemed disappointed in himself. He's not used to throwing interceptions. I think that when he threw the first interception, honestly, that kind of took him out of it a little bit because I think he was thinking after he hit Wilson so easily on that first drive, and then on that second drive, it looked like Wilson was wide open again from my vantage point at least. So he just throws up a ball, and kind of a lot of air gets under it, and then it's picked off. And then after that, like his next several throws just looked off. They weren't as confident. They were more inaccurate. And a lot of that has to do, obviously, with the mounting Indiana pressure as well. But yeah, that's my take on that.
Yeah, I think a big part of this was Indiana's pressure kind of exposing a way to get to Fields a little bit. That first interception, I think it definitely took the wind out of him because, it's the first interception this season. He's been nearly perfect. I think his last 2 interceptions were a little bit more cause for concern because when I look at the second interception, he didn't have enough time to scan the field. He kind of locked in on the target, and there were 3 defenders around him. And then the third interception, really, for my Browns fans out there, it really reminded me of a Baker Mayfield play, which is not something that you want to be related to. He kind of just threw it up there. Like he must have seen the receiver open, but he lobbed it up there. And I think it is not a direct result of, but a major result of the pressure that was being applied by Indiana. I think if he doesn't have time to kind of scan the field and look for second and third options, it's going to be tough for him to, with the 2 great receivers he has in Olave and Wilson, it's going to be tough for him to kind of adjust and have to find other guys maybe that don't have as much focus from the defense.
Yeah, I think it was a great point earlier. Kind of like that first interception really like set the tone and shook Fields up because in the first half where Wyatt Davis had that penalty that kind of like probably knocked or at least put a chip on his shoulder going forward. And as Kevin mentioned, Indiana was blowing up that A gap. Josh Myers and both of his guards were probably getting a lot more work than they expected to. And so that led to Fields feeling pressured and having to scramble and move around and, throw 3 interceptions. And so we saw it, as Griffin mentioned, when Fields left the podium, he didn't stick around at the end. He just kind of walked off almost immediately. How he's going to rebound, Illinois is going to be a team that I expect Ohio State is going to want to get some of the revenge on, per se. We'll probably talk about that more later. But how he rebounds from this is going to be really telling to how he closes out this season, in my opinion.
And then we look at what's left on the schedule. I mean, Ohio State's now sitting 4 games in, 5 weeks into the season after having the Maryland game magically wiped off of the calendar. We may talk about that at a later date or whatnot, about how it seems to be a very unequal system of what wipes a game out and what doesn't. We have Illinois, Michigan State, and Michigan. So we look in terms of the quarterbacks. Illinois, kind of a platoon system. I think it was Brandon Peters who was in there this week. Michigan State, whether or not they're still with Rocky Lombardi at that point, and then Michigan, whether or not it's Joe Milton or the other guy. They certainly are not going to see the same type of passing attack there. But then, what happens if, Ohio State gets through those 3 and gets a Big Ten championship game? Is if it's Wisconsin, you go against Graham Mertz. If it's Northwestern, you go against Peyton Ramsey. Ohio State has just a few short weeks to try and solve some of these issues in terms of its secondary. And you better believe that all 3 of those teams are going to be blitzing from the second that they get off of the out of the locker room until Ohio State shows that it can handle the pickups, and be able to play a full 60 minutes or at least 50 minutes. Because I think that at best, since we've gotten out of week 1, what have we seen? Maybe a good 30 minutes at any given point, whether or not it's been all in the first half or kind of split amongst the second and third quarters or whatnot. I mean, what say you?
Yeah, I'm just looking up at this Wisconsin Northwestern game right now, and Northwestern has the edge right now. Obviously Wisconsin's only played 2 games before this, so we hadn't seen as much. But what we had seen was a team that looked like, it could potentially give Ohio State a run for its money. Right now, we don't know what's going to happen in this game. Northwestern could pull this one out, and then Northwestern all of a sudden is that the dark horse team in the Big Ten West once again, just like it was in 2018. And with this Ohio State defense, we're already kind of getting a little bit of that 2018 feel back, if you can remember back to that season. So if Ohio State ends up meeting Northwestern in the Big Ten championship again, running it back to 2018.
I think Wisconsin looks a little less invincible today. Graham Mertz had 2 interceptions in the first half. He's 12 for 22 right now. You can hate on me all you want, but I think Indiana is the second best team in the Big Ten. I think this is going to be the biggest challenge Ohio State sees. I think the last 3 games are a great opportunity to get ready for what they will see in the Big Ten championship. They should win all of these games. They should be favored by a lot. I think it's a good bounce back opportunity against Illinois, but I truly believe that Indiana can play with anyone in the Big Ten, and this was the biggest test that they will face this season.
Definitely agree 100% on that. I think, these next 3 games for Ohio State, these are going to be opportunities to give those young guys some reps in the secondary, to kind of test out some new schemes to see who may be the 3rd best option for Fields to throw to, and for guys on the offensive line to regain some of that confidence. Because, with Harry Miller's, the penalties he accrued in the first half and last game, and some of the moments, where Fields had to scramble today, definitely some shining moments from the offensive line. So, as Kevin alluded to, there's not a whole lot of time until, all your chips are going to be on the line in the Big Ten title game. And so Ohio State's going to have a few games to kind of work out the kinks, but it's time to get going here.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you need to get it going, and it's interesting. I mean, I think you look at a lot of national champions, and I'm not saying Ohio State's going to win the national championship. But you look at a lot of teams that make that run to the national championship, and they do have that flat game. They do have that one game. And to get to something that Marcus said, I probably was the biggest hater when it came to Indiana. Oh, Indiana ain't played nobody. Well, Ohio State ain't played nobody leading up to this game either. So, there was a period where I was already planning out what memes I was going to send to Marcus when Ohio State was up 35-7 or whatnot, because it looked like the Buckeyes were going to run away with it. And then lo and behold, all hell broke loose. And, that was that at that point. And I'm sitting there watching my first game that I'm not in a press box for since the 2006 season. And I did find myself pacing a little bit. And it was not even so much about the outcome. It was out of the fact that I had written 5 attempts at writing the game story, 5 attempts, and none of them were able to ride. I had to keep pushing it down the line. I don't even know if what I wrote's in English, to be quite honest. So once we get off this show, I'm going to head back downstairs to the living room, and I'm going to look and see what I wrote, because I have no idea. It could be in tongues for all I know. But, a lot to process, a lot that we're going to be able to go over this week with things like Hot 11 and whatnot. But let's do a final whip around as we're at about the 30-minute mark with what everybody's final thoughts are, what your major takeaway is.
My major takeaway, I think everyone's major takeaway is going to be A, the pass defense for Ohio State, B, Justin Fields possibly out of Heisman contention. I actually predicted this game to only be about an 11-point game. So as far as that goes, I wasn't that far off. I don't know. Did Marcus have Indiana winning or something like that? Is that what we're getting at here?
No, he just was in love with them. No, but one of the guys from our Indiana site had an Indiana win, and I sat there and sent it in our Slack channel and mocked everybody. I was like, oh, look at this crap.
Yeah. Well, it certainly was a fun game. Today's my birthday, so I guess my final takeaway is it was a treat to watch this game personally, even though it was so weird and Ohio State didn't look great the entire game. I just thought it was a fun game in general. Just kind of a lot of the craziness that went on, the fact that the crazy Justin Fields interceptions, the deep balls from Penix, 500 yards passing. It was a fun game to watch in the press box today.
My biggest thing is this going to be a returning into a repeat of 2018? Are we going to have someone step up in the secondary? I know Justin Fields will bounce back. We all know Justin Fields will bounce back. I think it comes down to finding someone or finding multiple people who can play in the secondary. That's my big thing.
I think I've got 2 takeaways here. Ryan Day said earlier this week that they've got to be okay with punting when it comes to not gaining enough momentum. And they punted 5 times today. They punted 4 times against Rutgers. That's kind of showing today. But I think what's bigger is, Ohio State's pass rush. They only had 2 sacks today. And they had a really great game against Penn State a few weeks ago when Tommy Togiai kind of burst onto the scene. But the pass rush today was almost 0, with Penix just really lighting it up. And guys, aside from Zach Harrison early on, and they really had a lot of pressure early, that's an area of their game that they're really going to improve on, in addition to the secondary, just to put together a complete defense and then ultimately a complete game.
And let me find the button. There we go. And my final thoughts, it didn't have to be this way. I think that if Ohio State catches a break early in the game in terms of one of the calls, gets up a couple of scores there, you just don't know. I'll touch upon what somebody said earlier. If Justin Fields doesn't throw that early interception, it probably doesn't fester in his mind, and 1 doesn't become 2, doesn't become 3. We'll never know at this point. We won't know what would have happened at that point. But it does show why you have to bring it for 60 minutes. Happy for Master Teague. Happy that the running game got some things sorted out. I didn't think I would say it at any point this year, but now they have to kind of go back to the drawing board for the throw game. But I think a lot of it, too, is they have to go back for the protection and figuring some things out. A lot of confusion there. I'm looking forward to and not looking forward to going back on the DVR and watching this game to kind of see what worked and what didn't work. And to quote what former head coach Urban Meyer would say, the best thing about now being 4-0 is a chance to go 5-0. And that's kind of where they sit. But unless anybody flags me down right now before I take us off the air, that should wrap it up for this edition of Live with Buckeye Grove. Ohio State 42, Indiana 35. Buckeyes still unbeaten, but Buckeye Nation pissed off right now. Plenty of coverage here at BuckeyeGrove.com. Be sure to subscribe to our channels, either on YouTube or on Facebook. And if you've been looking to join BuckeyeGrove.com, join now with promo code Nike75. Get your first year at $75 and a $75 gift code to the Nike Fan Shop. Thanks for watching, and we will talk to you very soon.